Hey there, it's Nata here. My name is Nata Wanisorn, the new chief editor at CellPact. I have a PhD in molecular genetics. I'm also a holistic nutritionist and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. So, I'm very grateful to be joining the team at CellPact right now as the chief editor. And in this video, I want to demonstrate to you the importance of self-experiment as well as discussing why women should self-experiment. Okay, so I'm speaking from experience of 12 years in biomedical research. What I think is that there's a problem with biomedical science. I'm a holistic practitioner myself, and I've read scientific studies with respect to certain medical treatments and certain holistic health treatments, right? So a lot of times when there are placebo-controlled treatments, you're looking at the averages between two different treatments, right? But the thing is that there are individual differences among people, and a lot of times there are no significant difference between the treatment and the placebo, but this may not have accounted for the difference or the biochemical individuality among these subjects that are taking the placebo or the treatment. And I'm not saying that it's because the placebo work, but for example, chronic diseases like fibromyalgia and depression are very, very heterogeneous, which means that one person's depression is going to be very different from another person's depression, right? So you can have a case like this where one person responds to a placebo like this, but they have a very different response to another treatment. Even though overall the treatment, when it's evaluated in a randomized control trial context, it had no significant difference, or it was shown that it was not effective. And the thing is that when you are trying to resolve your health problems, that it's treating one person, not 10,000 people, right? Another problem is that the model of evaluating medical treatment is made for things like a medication, right, or surgery, so much more so than things like diet, sleep, weight loss, supplements, spiritual or mental emotional healing versus placebo. So to design studies to evaluate these factors are a lot more complicated than it is to evaluate a pill. And another thing is that human is a whole person, right? We are multidimensional people. So it's really like kind of blindsided to only look at one pill or one factor, right? Because in the end, you're going to eat every day, you're going to sleep every day, right? You might take supplements every day, and you're taking a few different supplements. So the model is not looking at what are the malfunctions inside of someone's body. This model is looking at, okay, how do we sell a pill, right? Which there might be some room for this at some points, but in most cases, I disagree with the model of finding a pill for a disease, because a human is very complex, and a disease is usually multi-dimensional, multi-factor, right? So there are many things that contribute to it. There's some exceptions to that, right? But for now, I'm just gonna consider this possibility that maybe biomedical science on its own, the way it's operating right now, is not adequate to evaluate all the healing modalities that exist. Another thing is that if you don't ask questions, you don't get an answer, right? For all the published scientific research or clinical research that are out there is there because someone asked the question. A researcher asked the question. They have to seek funding in order to address the question. They have to justify to their funding bodies that this question is a valid question, right? So nobody will ask the questions of what's the impact of chakra balancing exercises on the frequency of UTIs or urinary tract infections, right? What are the odds of a question like this get evaluated by randomized control trials, right? What are the odds of something out there gets this kind of funding that, a medication would get, right? Either from the government or the private sector, right? So this is something to think about. So simply because there's no proof for a treatment or a way of overcoming a disease doesn't mean that it's a proof against, right? And another thing, very important reason that women should self-experiment is because women are not the same as men physiologically, right? So many of you who have tried to lose weight alongside a male will know that men will lose weight a lot faster, right? That's because our hormones and nervous systems work differently. Women struggle more from hormonal problems and problems like depressions, and very importantly, for premenopausal women, we live in hormonal cycles, right? So maybe we respond to a treatment one way before we ovulate, and we also respond to it a different way after we ovulate. And lots of drugs and health evaluations, the studies are done in male humans or mice, right? So that might explain why there's not enough data for certain topics, or maybe a treatment that works for men won't work for you. And I'm an advocate of the quantified self movement, but I don't necessarily think that this should be an underground thing, because if you're looking at different tiers of evidence, right? Case control studies or self-experiment or self-hacking is a form of evidence. It's not going to be as good as randomized control trials or things that are inferred from animal studies. Things that are inferred from animal studies provide different forms of background information, right? But case control studies is a form of evidence. It's a form of scientific evidence that you can rely on, especially if this happens to a lot of people, right? So I'm going to discuss how you can do this, right? How you can self-hack yourself by testing a predicted hypothesis with your body, right? With some of their very safe hypotheses. So what I do as a scientist is, number one, I formulate a hypothesis, which is pretty much an educated guess, which could be based on an observation. It could be an inference from known information or popular theories or assumption. And then I design and do experiments to test the effects of their independent variables to test the hypothesis. It could be, okay, so if I get on the lectin avoidance diet, what would happen, right? So the hypothesis could be that the lectin avoidance diet will take away my skin problems, right? So to test the hypothesis, I get on the diet, and then I see what happens. And if my skin clears up, then I accept the hypothesis as true. If my skin doesn't clear up, then I reject the hypothesis, or might say that maybe I need to eliminate a few more foods, so I need to add a few more supplements. So that is refining and retesting a hypothesis. So you might think that testing things on yourself is going to cost a lot of money, but the thing is that there's a lot of quantified self tools that don't cost a lot. Right, I have a glucometer that costs like $10, right? And the strip costs a little more, but it can tell you about how well you are regulating your blood sugar. The thermometer can tell you about your fertility, right? If you track it regularly and see the ups and downs in your own temperature level. The strap heart rate monitor that can be connected to the Bluetooth on your smartphone usually costs under $100, and it can tell you about your stress levels, or it can even tell you about your food sensitivities if you use the right app. And most importantly, journaling is a great way of collecting data and comparing between different states or different effects that you're looking at. So now that you know how to self-hack, I'm gonna explain to you a few of the experiments that I was able to do and the data that I got. So example number 1 is the potato hack. So I found this book in Chris Kresser's materials of all places, and I felt like I had to test this because it's very compelling that Chris Kresser mentioned this, right? The premise of the potato hack is that you can lose weight and keep it off by eating only potatoes for 3 to 5 days. Right? Because cooked and cooled potatoes have starch that crystallizes into a more difficult to digest form, or in other words, resistant starch. So they can be more filling and they're good for the gut bacteria. So, and they said resistant starch are resistant to the digestion. So that means that it shouldn't have the same effect on your blood sugar as would their non-resistant starch. And in order to make the resistant starch, the potato has to be cooked and cooled, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna test this. And I have 2 questions and a few hypotheses. So number 1 is, does the potato hack really work to lose weight and fat? And number 2 is, do the potatoes have high glycemic index? I mean, they do, but do the cooked and cooled potatoes have different effects on the blood sugar than freshly cooked potatoes? So in order to find out these results, I would have to track blood sugar response to potatoes. And I learned this after a really difficult experiment in graduate school that I have to do. I have to collect data without adding the potatoes in order to understand what my baseline is, because otherwise I don't even know if the potatoes will increase my blood sugar or if that's normally how my blood sugar is, right? The question is always compared to what, and that's very important. So what I do is I track my blood sugar from fasting 1, 2, and 3 hours post meal, right? And this is not a painless experiment. And number 2 is I track my body weight, body fat, my waist and hip girth, as well as bikini photos to see whether my body fat was really going down. And this was a 3-day experiment, right? So for my baseline, I just tracked my blood sugar after I had my normal foods, which is meat and vegetables, and I had rice once. And mind you, I tolerate the rice and the potatoes pretty well, so which allowed me to do this experiment. So if you don't tolerate these foods, then don't do this experiment, okay? So I tracked my blood sugar, and I found that my baseline with eating meats and vegetables is that it doesn't really increase my blood sugar that much, and it went back to my baseline blood sugar levels within about 2 hours. Right, so it went up, like at most with the rice and meat, it went up to 100 something milligram per deciliter. But if I had the potato hack, so if I only ate potatoes, I compared between cooked and cooled potatoes, right, which is the yellow line, the cooked and cooled potato number 1, the blue line, cooked and cooled potato number 2, right, and you can see that they really significantly increased my blood sugar to 140, 160 at about an hour after meals. And I also look at I tried eating the cooked and not cooled potatoes to see its effects on my blood sugar, and I also saw that it went up, but maybe not to the same extent as the cooked and cooled potato. So what I gathered here is that the resistant starch from the cooling process still got digested and it still got absorbed into my bloodstream. So that's one observation. Another observation I had was that my post-meal fatigue, which I usually got at about 2 hours, an hour and a half to 2 hours post-meals, still hit when I had the cooked and not cooled potato, but it didn't hit when I had the cooked and cooled potato. And that was interesting and surprising to me, because I used to think that the post-meal fatigue was because of hypoglycemia, but that was not the case because my blood sugar was high. But what I found was that it was how low my blood sugar went after it went up high that would affect my fatigue level, right? Because I felt it with the hot potatoes, but I didn't feel it with the cool potatoes. So that was interesting. Another result that I looked at was the weight and fat loss. So for the weight, I looked at, I just weigh myself like every morning, and I found that my body weight went down. And the Tanita scale also showed that their body fat also went down, which I was happy with. So I observed some rapid weight and fat loss, right? But I also proceeded to eat regularly right away, so there was no guarantee that I was gonna maintain the weight loss, even though I liked the results. Another example of this hacking experiment was that I tried this thing called PDTR therapy, or proprioceptive deep tendon reflex. I have a colleague who practiced this, right? And so I laid on the table, and he was pushing my arms and legs everywhere and touching my neck and my hip, which I was seeing him for, because I had some pain in my neck and my hip. And I noticed that as soon as the session was done, my anxiety levels went down, and he didn't do anything more than just pushing my hands and legs around, right? And he explained to me that he was able to release some of the tensions in my system that were stored from when I had my car accidents like 9 years ago. And immediately my heart rate variability went down from the first treatment. So that was a very interesting observation there, right? So like there might not be a lot of evidence in other ways whether PDTR therapy really works in treating certain things, and I'm not sure if this is going to pan out in our placebo-controlled trials, because everyone has different levels of traumas or injuries and things like that. But for me, it worked really well, and this was how I knew that it works for me. So I want to call you to action. Right? I want you to observe, ask questions, and experiment. You don't have to believe what anyone says. You don't even have to believe published information, because even like published information on PubMed are not always correct. So you should, when you do your experiment, you should publish your results where people can find it, such as on your website, on your blog, or where Google can find it. Right? There's some value to publishing things on PubMed, but a lot of it is not going to be accessible to the lay people. By doing this, you are empowering women to make evidence-based decisions based on your well-observed experiments, right? And you are also making available the scientific evidences that support natural, complementary, and alternative medicine that work, and against ones that don't.